All right, so this is a workshop. It's called Writing While Socialist. The object of doing a workshop like this is really to talk about writing, um, to hone the craft, and honestly, more than anything, is that I've done a lot of writing, and I meet people all the time who are brilliant, smart people who have wonderful ideas, and they say I'm not a writer, even though they have so much to say, and that's just a shame. And after being an editor and a writing tutor and other kinds of things, I wanted to try to broadcast out some thoughts about how we write, why we write, how it works, and more than anything, really put people in the headspace to start writing. So this is ideally about an hour's worth of stuff. It's a work night, so if people have to cruise, that's fine. But really the object here is to get people thinking about how we write, talking about writing as a political act, and then also, like understanding the craft and how to be a better writer. So, all right. So first of all, first problem is, who's a writer? So why do we talk about writing in general? First of all, there's a ton of stuff that needs to write. We have so much going on in the world, so much to understand, just to report, to know, and to learn, that really there's just not enough good writing going on. Second, as I said, there's a ton of really great thinkers, insightful people, and it becomes a confidence issue more than anything. It's not that they don't have good things to say, it's that they don't believe that they're writers, right? Then a third problem that happens often is there's some people who can write. They're competent writers, and they don't think about writing ever again. You basically learn about writing in grade school or high school or something, and then you never come back to it. You just kind of do it. And the fourth thing is trying to understand that the act of writing has politics in it, in its language, in its construction, in the way that we approach problems as writers. So, all right, why do people write? First of all, because you want to broadcast an idea or your story out, right? I'm going to put these in as simple terms as I possibly can, but you know something and you want other people to know it. That's one reason why people write. Another one is you want to report, analyze, or reflect, which is basically the same thing. You know something, but it's a more specific thing. I'm going to report on this, thing that's going on, or something happened, and I'm going to tell the story of what we learned from it, or I'm going to reflect on it. All right. Another reason why we want to write is because it's actually clarifying for us. If you're a socialist, right, you're trying to have clearer political ideas as well. And the process of writing is very helpful in trying to organize your thoughts, to advance things, and it really forces you to think and wrestle with problems. So, for instance, right, if you're going to make a claim about something in a written piece, you have to actually be able to support it, or else it's not really going to work. And oftentimes testing and trying to go through that process in a really determined way is going to force you to to really think, is that true? Is that a good case? I don't know, right? And then lastly, which is how maybe people are familiar with writing as socialists, is that it's a political project, right? People are somewhat familiar with Lenin's ideas, the publication as an organizer. We can talk about that more if you'd like, which is that the actual process of making a written thing is something that organizes people socially and gets you into a rhythm, and it provides some structure. If you have, there's other things that it does also, is that when you're telling your story, you're demonstrating a method of how you're approaching a problem, which is a political act. There's also kind of, I think, the CLR James method, which is reflect, cohere, and project, which is you go to the class, you take in the ideas, right? You try to cohere it and clarify it as best as possible and return it. So that's another concept of how writing is a political construction. And then lastly, which is really basic, which is just responding to something that someone else has said. right? Somebody said some shit. I didn't like it. Now I'm going to tell you what I think. That doesn't sound political, but I mean, it's just how we engage, right? All right, so let's see. So here's the problem with writing to start, right? Which is that actually we write more than we've ever written before, but we don't actually think about ourselves as writers, most of us, right? People text, they're on social media all day, we write emails, we comment on blogs, we write reviews. This is all writing, right? It's just that people think that writing is something different. And it's because writing is a somewhat alienated process, right? Most people learn writing through schooling, right? You're going to get forced to write a book review or a 5-paragraph essay, and you're like, why am I doing this? And it doesn't feel like something that's an extension of yourself or your politics or your practice, right? And then very shortly after, right, like, a lot of people go through high school, they do basic writing, but then unless you're going to need it as a skill, a lot of people don't ever think about writing again. I mean, obviously, that's a broad statement. There's plenty of people who write all the time. I'm just in terms of how we are socialized. What we then learn, right, is that writing becomes something that's kind of a tool of experts. And really quickly, you can read something and know within seconds, is this meant for me or not, right? So you read something that's like a law journal and you're like, yep, not for me. Might have great ideas in there, but really quickly, the way things are written tell you who it's for and what it's supposed to do. All right. So then we also don't have a lot of good examples or opportunities to write. And that's, I think, also because writing has become somewhat individualized rather than something that we do together. We don't share our writing and work collectively to like think about our ideas, test them, and then come back to it. All right, so essentially what I want to throw out here is that the biggest problem with people and writing is not that your ability to do it, right? Most everybody has the ability to put words to paper or on text or whatever. We do this all the time. It's that we kind of believe that writing is a thing and that it's something that other people do, that we're not good writers or we're not smart enough to write or something like that. Okay. All right, so I'm here to tell you, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you. If ever you, I don't know, I'm probably like the only person that watched that era of Saturday Night Live, but I love that shit. So, okay, let's kind of break down though. A lot of this is becoming familiar with what writing is, and then realizing that that what we're going to do most of the time when we write something is follow a sort of prescribed method, right? So there's different types of writing that happen commonly, and that you should know what they are and be prepared. Kind of if you're more familiar with them, then it's easy to produce your own. So broadly speaking, there's 4 different kinds of writing, which is reporting something happened, right? You're telling that story, it happened. An analysis or an investigation, which is why did that thing happen or what does that mean? Then there's debate or polemics, which is they're saying this and they're wrong. And lastly, an educational piece, which is here's what you need to know about blank. So in general, you're either telling a story or you're having a conversation, right? Like it becomes more complicated, but start as simply as possible. What is the story that you're telling, or what's the conversation that you're involved in that you would like to be part of, and you want to advance that conversation? So part of saying that there's all these different types of writing is that if you're going to be somebody that wants to write more, you have to read, right? You've become familiar with the kinds of writing that's out there. And really, like, a lot of times, I think the way that we consume writing these days is like someone shares thing and you're like, my people like that, I'm gonna read it, scan it for what I need to know. I read the first 3 paragraphs probably, and I got what I needed out of it and I'm gone. But if you're going to start really thinking about writing as a craft, find some writing that you like and ask yourself, why do you like it, right? What kind of writing is it? And then try to track what is it that they are doing, because that is something that you really want to get a feel for, right? All right, so this is an addition of good idea, bad idea about the goods and bads of writing. So good writing, what is it? It's clear. You know what's happening. You understand what the writer is trying to convey, and it flows, right? You're not stopping all the time as you're reading. It doesn't force you to reread a complicated sentence or look up a word. The actual writing itself is convincing, right? Even if you don't agree with it, it's got a good reason, it's supported, and it has facts that, like that are trustworthy, that you feel like is reasonable. It's not like somebody's just dropping some bombs, like no support whatsoever, or they're saying something and burying like all what the actual argument is beneath word salad. All right, and then so lastly, it's good writing's enjoyable, right? You like what they did. It approached it in a new way that you thought was interesting, or it had a good voice or good imagery, right? And I think as socialists, oftentimes we don't really think about writing as something that should be enjoyable, but it should be, right? I mean, if you're trying to write to a lot of people, you want them to read what you're writing. All right, bad writing is basically the opposite, which is you don't know what they're saying. Their arguments are unclear. You don't know what the ideas are. It's vague or it's overly abstract, right? So I've definitely read like a page before and I'm like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. It's got a lot of words. There's sentences, but what does it mean? I don't know. So that's what you really want to avoid. Like it should be clear to your reader what you're saying. All right, another thing bad writing is it's not really convincing. It makes some logical leaps, right? It's got some thin evidence, or it makes claims without supporting them. All right, third one is it's just a fucking slog, right? It's too long, it's pretentious. It's got a million commas and clauses, right? Where it's like a sentence that is actually a whole paragraph, and you're like, what am I reading right now? So you don't want to make your writing something that is difficult to get through. It's not to say you can't have well-constructed sentences, but you want to pick how you're doing that. And lastly, if it's too formulaic, right, then there's nothing new or interesting about it, right? I've read that, some article a million times before. It's the same article, it's just updated. All right. So here's some sins of writing for the left. And we on the left can be especially bad at writing, even though we're very competent writers. And why is our writing bad often? One, jargon. We overuse big words that people don't know, right? It's language that is directed only at people who are in the know, right? Oftentimes you're trying to convey your authority by saying shit about the means of production in a sentence that, you probably could have chosen something else that people would understand. So you want, like, if it's overladen with jargon, then it's unreadable, right? It becomes something where people learn it's not for them. Style. So also people tend to try to reproduce some classic texts on the left. Either what they do is they look at polemics where someone is just lighting up, their adversary, and they try to write like that, right? There's a lot of people that want to write like Lenin when he's spicy or something like that, and it's not where we are. Or, and this is much more likely, is that your writing is all learned from the academy, right? People go to university. University teaches you how to write, and that's the place where you hone your skills, and it's honed for that context. It's not something that most people can read very well. All right, tone, already kind of talked about this, which is that it's polemical. But the main thing about that is that people read kind of your intent out of your words. So if you're trying to destroy somebody, right, and you're like coming all, heavy, people can read that, and there's, it's got a certain thing it's trying to do. So ask yourself, is that really where you want to go with it? Last thing is methodological, right? Which is like what a lot of left writing will do is basically show we already have the answers. We know the answers before you've even asked the question. It's just about applying the thing, right? So you're not taking someone on the journey with you. All right, so let's talk about some quick corrections about things to do if you're a leftist and you want to write. So first of all, try to use everyday language, right? If you're going to use terms, pepper them, right? Explain what it is when you're using terms. Introduce things that you are generally not understood if people haven't like read Capital or something like that, right? There's a lot of stuff where it's not that people are incapable of understanding it, it's that we haven't introduced it, right? So say what you mean, explain it, and then you can move on. Use some good imagery, right? Even Marx made lots of references to plays, works of literature, monsters. I mean, like half of his stuff is like the vampire of someone does this and this beast did this and Shakespeare said this and it's like that, right? I mean, you can use your own imagery. Oftentimes we're very, what do you call it? Like sanitized, right? It's like an operating room where there's not supposed to be anything in there. It's just politics and it's cut and you leave. Oh, I like that. That's a good one, Ricardo. Is it exaggeration, right? Is it a huge crisis? Is everything like the end of the world? You should be able to be pretty honest about what is the scope of what you're talking about. And lastly, right, try not to rely on Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, whatever, as your evidence, right? So think about this sort of like, you know, like salt and pepper or a spice. You don't want to have the whole meal is just salt, right? Like you put it in there, it's a little bit of flavor, right? But you don't want too much in. So if you want to, you know, quote somebody that's just got like a baller thing to say, great, but don't do it a lot because it's got diminishing value. And frankly, it tells people I'm about to do a thing right now where you have to have this specialized knowledge. What if it's a good piece of writing, you should be able to convey those ideas in your words. Okay. How to write good. All right, so this is really the part where I like to kind of go through the process of what you do when you're writing. All right, so this is my overview, which is first, know what you're actually writing about. Then actually plan it and think about it and outline what you're going to do. Talk it through, like actually go and talk with somebody or yourself and explain what is it that you're going to do. And then, right, if you're like me, like you put together a document and then you're like, this is the official one and it's got to be perfect. So just go open something else or whatever and just start free writing, just whatever. I'm going to go through these in detail. So you free write, then you write, then you revise your writing. And a lot of people don't do this. They're just like last period. All right, send. So you do actually want to revise. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we do that. Get feedback from other people and then revise again. So first of all, what is it that your writing is supposed to do? Do you know what you want to say? The thing that is hard about writing more than anything is that you can't write anything if you don't actually know what you think. This is the hardest thing about writing on any topic is you don't know what you actually think or want to say. When you have clarity about what it is that you want to say, then the writing becomes so much easier. But I've read a lot of pieces where somebody has a kind of an idea, but they don't really know. And then the rest of the piece is trying to cover up where they don't know what they actually think, right? So you can tell that pretty easily. Usually you want to spend more time than anything figuring out what do you think, what is it you're trying to say. After that, right, know who is it for, right? I mean, I talked a lot about the sins of left writing, but you know, like think about who is it you're writing to, and then you write based off of that. If you're writing for like, you know, a popular magazine, you don't want it to be full of all kinds of jargon, right? But if you're writing for a journal or something like that, you could probably get away with some shorthand that you don't need to spend as much time explaining. So you're going to write about your audience. And the thing that I would say is really know who your audience is, right? Like try to understand like what is accepted ways of putting stuff out there and fit yourself with that. All right. And lastly, in general, no matter who you're writing to, assume that nobody knows what the fuck you are talking about ever, right? So even if somebody kind of knows, the act of defining what you're talking about makes everything else clearer, right? So try to think about it like you're talking to somebody about this and they have no idea what you're talking about. How would you explain it? All right. And then lastly, not only do you want to know what is it you're trying to do and who is it for, but what do you want somebody to come away with by the time they're done with you, like reading your piece? If you're just like, I just want to like own some people that are wrong on the internet, you know, maybe question why you're writing a thing. But you know, you probably have something that you're thinking you really want people to take away from this when they're done. Think about that as you're writing it, right? And then ask yourself as you're revising, did that actually happen, right? Are they going to come away with what I wanted them to come away with? All right, quick question here. Is anybody interested in journalism? Because this can be an aside. If people don't want to talk about journalism, I can leave this alone. But if you do, I'll go through this. Yes to journalism. Okay, great. I'm going to ask a quick open question so I can drink some tea. All right, why is journalism important for the Socialist Project? Does anybody want to try to give their own answer to that? Just jump on out if you got an idea.
You know me, I like to talk. I'll give it a go. I think one reason is there is already a hegemonic voice out there reporting on all these things, you know, from like these major corporations that are owned, you know, like Daily Oklahoman where I live, you know, they're owned by the millionaires. And we need to obviously represent our case of what is occurring from our class perspective. Okay. And challenge their ideas and their arguments because they're taken as givens by a lot of ordinary people. But I'll shut up.
That's good. All right, I'll take one more. Why do socialists want to do journalism? I see look at events with a materialist lens, hegemonic narratives, Eye of Sauron, teaching class awareness. All right. So that's good. All right. So why is it that socialists really do journalism, right? And you know, I'm gonna violate the thing I just said, and I'm gonna talk about Marx and others, which is, you know, if you go through and you look, Marx, Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, Gramsci, a lot of these people all actually were journalists also, right? I mean, they're major theoreticians, but they wrote and reported and understood this to be an important part of the socialist project. So why is that? All right, so first of all, what are we trying to do as socialists is actually deepen class consciousness. And you don't do that, that's not something that just happens, right? It's not just like the struggle happens and people automatically figure it out, right? Is you do need to interpret the world also and draw conclusions, right? So we do that by explaining the world as it's unfolding. So, and then, you know, giving conclusions as that happens. This is not just propaganda though, right? And I really want to stress that is that you don't want to write a tabloid where, you know, your journalistic piece is like, extra capitalists betray again, right? Like, it's like, that's not news. what you want to do is actually stop to think about what are the events that are happening around and then portray them. And this, my argument is that socialist journalists do news differently than bourgeois media. It's not just about what you say and your conclusions. It's not just your angle, but it's also about the way that you pursue the story as a journalist that's really important here. I will also throw out that the act of being a journalist is very important if you're a socialist organizer. So it allows you to go engage people and you have a legitimate reason, right? Hello, I'd like to, you've got a thing going on. Like, I'm just a guy off the street. I want to know what's happening. It's might be a little weird, but hi, I'm attached to this thing. What you're doing is important and we'd like to tell your story. People want their story told and you're building a relationship, right? And that's validating and it helps establish a relationship. This is important. And lastly, I'd say because you need to understand the world as it is in order to theorize it and then develop new practice. So this is all part of why journalism matters as a socialist. So I'm going to talk about what is bourgeois journalism and then what is socialist journalism as a little bit of a act in thinking about what it is we do. The first is bourgeois journalism can be a lot of things, but the dominant form of bourgeois journalism is called objective journalism, right? And this is actually a relatively new concept of how the news works. Up until about 1920, pretty much all news was partisan news. This was all something that was attached to a political party or a club or something like that that had an angle and wanted to say, this is how we're going to explain the world so people come around to our ideas. In the 20s, this shifted, right? And there was this new concept of objective journalism, which is that the truth is just an objective fact, and that certain papers or news agencies or whatever, they are neutral and they can present real facts that everybody can agree on. All right. And so this is something that's actually relatively new. It's about 100 years old. So in order for this to work, though, the history on this is that it actually depended on disrupting and suppressing other media that did exist. So, the history of the Socialist Party is that it had hundreds of daily, weekly, and monthly papers and relied very heavily on the postage system to get those out. Besides the fact that they raided a lot of these papers, in 1919, I want to say, the Postmaster General basically said all of that shit is now not fit to be circulated through the mail. Some of it's obscene. A lot of it will no longer qualify for like the reduced postage. So that's how we're going to destroy the circulation of like socialist and labor media. Later, that process gets even more consolidated. Early radio had local stations. A lot of them were owned by labor federations, and later the Federal Communications Commission comes in and says, nope, we need to regulate these things, and only certain approved news agencies or whatever are allowed to have these licenses. So that's a political project. All right. Anyway, history over. But bourgeois objective journalism, it presents itself as both objective and impartial. So we have to look at both parts of that. Objective is generally a positive thing. It means we're going to take facts, right? Somebody did say something, we're going to verify it, right? Or get an account of events. It's not just made up shit, right? Like, we're going to have to prove that this happened. All right. But the second part of this is really important, which is that they give the illusion of being impartial, which means they try to say they don't have an opinion. And I don't think I need to convince all of you that, bourgeois media is not impartial. It's, it's full of its own ideology and tries to present itself as just normal to become hegemonic. So they have an angle, it's presented as default, and they're trying to naturalize it. So how do they do this? bourgeois journalism does, it relies on certain things and certain things only. The only acceptable sources in regular bourgeois journalism are direct eyewitness accounts, right? So there's a car crash. Yep, I saw it happen. The car went by and, whatever. Then that guy hit that guy. Or what, like, so think about it like that. You have to literally be there. Or persons of authority, right? So who's allowed to speak on something? You can read things all the time where it's like, workers are organizing at Amazon. Random academic who hates unions but has credentials says this is going to be terrible for the economy. That's just objective news because an authority said so, right? But the people that are regularly conveyed as persons of authority are police, experts, academics, government officials, business owners, and so on, right? Which is to say that if you're a regular working person, you are not a person of authority. All right, and then lastly, this doesn't happen often, but studies from reputable sources. So if a think tank puts out a paper, that's newsworthy. If a bunch of community activists go test the water and then they come out and say, this is the thing, they're gonna say, well, you're not reputable. So, all right, a final thing about bourgeois journalism is it has no history or context, right? This is an important part of how the news is presented. Thing just happens, right? It just happened. And you don't talk about any of the past unless it's absolutely necessary for the story, right? So you're not like, if you're going to say, there's going to be, I don't know, some people are protesting at the city building, right? They're mad about racism. Like they say that this is the thing. It's like what will not be in that story is here are all of the things that have happened for the last 5 years that have built to this, right? Or anything that contributes to a deeper understanding. It's just presented as why are people out there and they're mad, right? I mean, we can talk about any kind of configuration about this, but that's generally how it works. So if we're going to flip that, what is socialist journalism like in concept? It's objective, but it's partial, right? Which is to say, you're not impartial. You actually care what's going to happen as a result of this story. Yeah, you don't have to. I wouldn't say lay it on thick, right? But you understand that there's power in the situation, and you're on the side of the people that are not powerful, right? People that are striving to become powerful. All right, so you're honest, right? You own that your take is there, right? You try as hard as possible to just also be objective and have good sources and stuff. But you're that's what your angle is, right? This is clearer. Like right now, labor journalists tend to be objective and partial. That's maybe more people are familiar with this. A lot of like first of all, because capitalists don't generally want to write that much about labor. So the people that write about it are people that have a vested stake in it. But it's good to know, right, that you still want to be objective. It doesn't mean that just because you're partial, you have a license to say whatever you want, but you have an angle, and that's I'm on the side of workers and students and whatever. Oh, that's a good question. Would I consider democracy now objective and partial? Sure, I think so. But you ask yourself, what is their partisan take, right? Certainly objective. I would not say that democracy now is going to pick up something if they can't actually stand by it. But their take is that they're not necessarily a socialist, publication. They're basically a progressive outfit. And so, they might not have the same interests as us in this project, but whatever. All right, second thing, socialist journalism, it rejects the constraints of so-called authoritative sources, right? So, if you're going to be writing about something, who is an authority to a socialist journalist? Workers, community members, students, etc., right? Like people who are involved and have a stake in the fight are considered reputable sources if you're a socialist, right? Um, you know, make sure that it's still a good story and a convincing argument, right? You don't have to platform just anybody, but you're not going to accept this as a constraint. You also can still use all the other sources, right? But you're going to be open to whatever works for the story that needs to be told. All right. Third thing about socialist journalism is it actually has context and history in it, right? So here's what you need to know, right? I'll use an example of something I wrote recently, which is I wrote about the Teamster election, right? So why is this happening, right? What do you need to know in order to understand this story? Well, here's the history. This stuff has been happening for the last 5 years. These people are like this and that's like that. So you can't understand any of it unless you know what that history is, right? So this is kind of important. It doesn't have to be exhaustive. You don't want to write a history paper, but you can refer back to important events that the reader needs to know, because it will shift the reader's understanding of the events, right? This is the second protest at the city after the first time where city officials promised that they would do these reforms. Reforms never came, right? Important to the story. All right, lastly, like I said, it puts itself squarely in the camp of wanting the movement to succeed, right? I think about this often as you pose questions to the movement, and that part of your investigation as a journalist is posing those and being kind of thinking through what are things that could happen and asking those. So you could be like, all right, you're writing about student stuff, right? And they're the story is they're going to do this campaign or whatever, and then you get to ask whatever questions as you're interviewing somebody. That can include stuff that you are anticipating as problems, but as a friendly source, right? So it's like, what are you going to do when the summer term comes? How do you envision this campaign continuing, right? That's a friendly, challenging question that's helping to pose questions to the movement for it to succeed. All right, so now we're going to talk about essay writing, which I would call they out here saying. All right, so generally when you're writing an essay, think about this as a conversation, okay? You are going to put something out there for some reason. What is that reason? There's usually two reasons why anybody does this. They're very basic. One, something isn't being said that needs to be said, right? A thing's happening and people are talking about this, but they're not talking about this thing, and that's very important. Or two, they are saying stuff and you think that they're wrong, right? I disagree. Like the take is this and they keep saying that, but they're wrong, right? Those are generally the two ways that you write about, or you write essays or something. So what you want to do is help the reader understand what is the conversation that they are now entering, right? So if you think about writing an essay, like there's a conversation being had, right? Right, be like a polite host and be like, oh, this is what we're talking about right now, right? You're at a table, everybody's eating, somebody comes up, and then don't just like put them in there and then say, oh yeah, you'll pick it up, you'll figure it out. Like it sucks. So tell people what the conversation is, right? So I use this often, which is if I was going to tell my friends that I'm going to go write something, what would I say? Because if I were to be like, okay, I'm going to write something about why capitalist media sucks, it's because it's hegemonic and, there's the whole thing about like, if you can't tell somebody in very simple terms what the basis of your writing is, nothing you write is going to work out, right? You have to have a very clear, simple conception that you can convey to somebody else. Even if, it's broad, or it's like, I'll go back to this Teamster article. Here's how I would throw this out. People are saying that it's a bunch of reformers that are winning. I don't think so. This guy used to be, like a Hoffa thug. And now just because he went over to the other side, they're saying that it's all going to be fine. But I don't think so. That doesn't cut it for me. You understand that pretty quickly, right? You leave out, you don't have to go into all the details, but the beats of the story are pretty clear. So maybe the most helpful framework that I've heard in this is they say, I say. Okay. So when you're writing as a conversation, they say something and then you're returning it, right? So what's being said in general, what's the conversation, and who's saying it, right? So it's not just like there is a debate happening right now around, I don't know, what's the debate that's happening right now? Derek, I see you're ready to fire one out.
Bowman.
All right. There's a debate happening around Jamal Bowman. Who's debating, right? Like, give the necessary information. Who's saying it? What's being said? What needs to happen? Okay. So you, as the writer, have to establish that this is the conversation. All right. So tell them what they need to know. And then after you've said this is the conversation, then you come in with what you want to say, right? So here's an example. They say this election is different. And because it's different, we have to vote for Biden. That's what they say. I say this happens every fucking election cycle, right? It's always the most important election ever. So that's a they say, I say, right? You're boiling down the core of an argument and then thinking about what your return is. All right, any thoughts or questions before I move on? I know this is a lot of me talking. All right, then we're going to plow through. Okay, so methodologically, I'm going to bring you back to grade school for a moment here, which is that the 5-paragraph essay is still actually the general structure. All right, so we might think that we've all graduated off of the 5-paragraph essay, but the reason why it's taught is because it's actually useful, which is basically this. You're introducing whatever you're talking about, and then you're saying, this is what I say. Then you give your arguments, right? Argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, and then your conclusion, right? So you have a rule of 3 in this. So you'll have argument 1, and that could be 3 subsets, right? It's a general category, right? Which is, I don't know. This is why it's not different this year. And then you go through, not different for this reason, not different for that reason, not different for this reason. Next thing, right? This is not a solution for this reason, right? 1, 2, 3. Threes, I think the reason why they work is because, then if any one of your arguments fails, you've got a couple other to back you up. It shows that you've got to build, you've got enough of substance that, you're not just firing one off. So you can make this as complicated or as simple as you want, but generally, I think that this is still something that is useful. All right. Structure. All right, so let's talk about how we do this now. Generally, when you're going to do this, write out your stuff by hand. There's a lot of research that shows that writing it out by hand, you process it differently, right? And so it kind of helps you in how you're going to construct things, right? You get a visual sense of what it is that you're doing and something about the tactileness. All right, what you want to do is structure your arguments so they build. All right, so if you're thinking about it like it's a story, or if it is a story, right? Like if you're making a chronological argument, don't jump back and forth in history without telling people what you're doing, right? You want to have a sense that it's flowing forward. It's as easy as possible to follow. All right, in each section that you're going to write when you write an outline, write in plain language what it is that you're going to be arguing, right? And when I say that, I mean plain fucking language, right? So I'm going to write, here's my outline. It's like this. And then, all right, so paragraph 1, explain how they're claiming they're doing this party surrogate, but actually it's just regular Democratic Party shit. I'm not confused by that. I know where that's taking me because it's just straight into the point. What you don't want to do in an outline is try to make it sound sophisticated when that it's just clogging you up. You want to be very clear. here I need to do this, right? And when you write out, right, in your structure that you've got your five, introduction, 1, 2, 3, conclusion, and then you actually write here, write this, here, write that, it's also going to help you track what you're doing, because often in the process of writing, you get so engrossed in what you're doing that you forget what's the next part here, right? So I finished writing all this. Oh, okay, now here's the part where I talk about it's just regular Democratic Party shit. Okay. Last thing on your structure and outline, talk it through out loud. Go talk to somebody else, and like, especially, I can't stress this enough, if you have comrades around you, form like a writing circle or something, right? Where, here's where we're going to meet every couple of weeks, and this is what I'm working on, right? And talk it through, right? And see, does that make sense? I wrote out my my ideas, and this is how I'm going to structure this. Does that structure make sense? If someone's like, wait, what are you doing? You might want to go back and revisit it, right? Because if it's not clear in this plan, it's going to be way harder, right? All right. So let's, you got your structure down, you've done some outlining, the actual writing, okay? Free write. I don't know if people recall what this is, but you just open a document or something and just write whatever comes to your mind, right? And the reason why you do that is because often you'll stare at your computer screen trying to formulate the perfect sentence, right? And then you feel like an asshole, and it's terrible and grueling. What you want to do is literally just start writing anything to because it will get your process moving, right? So oftentimes I'll just be like, okay, like I'll write the words, okay, what am I doing right now? Right now, I guess I'm going to be writing out this thing where I'm going to argue this. And then I'm like, oh, okay, wait, right. Now I've got something going. It's stupid. It seems weird, but do it and it will help you get moving. Okay. So when you're writing stuff out, think to yourself, what is the catalyst here? And what I mean is something happened. That's why you're writing. What was it? Okay. So start with the action when you write an introduction. Okay. Here, I'm going to write an introduction. We're going to talk about the Bowman thing. Something happened. What was it? What happened was the NPC decided that they're not going to expel Bowman. That's what happened, right? So that is straight right to the point. That's the action, right? And now you're responding to that, or think about anything that's going on. Okay, so what happened, and now why are you responding to it? Now, I keep saying this, but assume your reader has no idea what you're talking about. So give all of the answers: who, where, when, why, what, when. Like, answer all of those questions. It shouldn't be hard to figure out what you're talking about. So give all of the necessary information. And lastly on this, right, and this is true for introductions, but it's also true for every new argument, which is prepare your reader for where you're going before you go there, right? So as a reader, you read best when you know what you're about to take in, right? So you want to tell people where you're going to go so that they follow you and they know what to expect. It makes it easier to read. So if you're, thinking about it like a car, you signal and then you turn, right? So what I'm going to do is this, right? Like, these are why these things are important for this, and that, and whatever, right? So it prepares you, like, okay, they're going to talk about these things. So, two things you don't want to do. One, just turn abruptly without telling anybody what you're doing, right? It's like, I'm writing about Bowman, and now the betrayals of 1970, where it was like, what the fuck's happening, right? Like, you need to tell somebody what it is that you're doing before you do it, right? So, and tell them why, right? And also the opposite is true. Don't say you're going to do something and then not pick it up, right? Like, don't be the person that signals and then drives straight for like a mile, right? That's not useful either. Okay. So stylistically, some of these things are things that you probably already know, but one, develop your voice, right? Most of us have learned to cull your voice and to trim it down and not write like something that sounds like you. You're trying to make it sound as neutral and, like, I don't know. I guess I would call it the like Midwest Kansas accent of news broadcasting, except for like your writing, right? You're just trying to sound like everybody. Actually write the way that you are, right? So if you think about it, when you're developing your voice, write like you talk, but do that better, right? You're kind of becoming your best self. What do you like about the way that you deliver information, right? And then do that, right? Or if you've got, your own idioms or peculiarities, actually put that in your writing. It's actually enjoyable, okay? So this is a thing that I do a lot, which is when I'm having trouble writing, just start talking out loud about what it is you're trying to do, and then actually write those words that you just said out loud down, because that's essentially all you're really doing is you're taking how you're going to convey information and you're putting it down more formally and cleaned up. Okay, so with your style, try to have some fun with it, right? I mean, I think that we have really received wisdom that left writing is serious fucking business, right? But, if you want, like, the objective here is for people to read what you wrote, right? And if someone's going to read it, it's because it's going to be a good read. It's going to be enjoyable, right? Sometimes people might hate what you have to say and really just love your style and want to come for that too, right? I mean, it's good to have a voice. So if you've got a joke, that's okay, right? Throw your joke in, right? If you've got a metaphor, colorful imagery, if you want to reference something from a TV show that you think is applicable, that's all fair game. You can do whatever you want as long as it's, helping develop the writing. Okay. So put in whatever you want and then edit it to make it work better, right? All right. And a couple other things that I'll throw in there is avoid lazy writing, right? Lazy writing is this. In this essay, I will argue the following things. First, I will argue this, then I will do that. And by finally, it will be like this, right? Like, that's horrible. Nobody wants to read that, right? So actually try to say, tell people how you're going to do something, but don't, actually try to make it enjoyable, right? Like if you were going to go tell somebody about what you're talking about, right? Think about how you would convey that, because only an alien monster would say, first I will argue X, then I will show, right? Like you really want to think about this as a personable thing that's, that people can read pretty quickly and follow you and get a sense of who you are when you're writing. Okay. All right, so this is like some more on that, which is generally one, if you're not having any fun writing something, chances are it's not really going to be fun to read. So, think about when you're writing something, like, not everything is fun. Like sometimes it's a very serious thing that's going on and it's not time for jokes. But if you're making commentary, right, like think about how would you like to convey that, right? And consider, like, is there a pun, is there wordplay, is there comparisons, right? As much as you can, say things in plain language. Okay, so how are we doing before I go on to this last section? I know that we've been running hard. Good. Okay. So this last section, we're going to talk about some of the politics of writing. Okay. So first of all, think about, like, I want people to think about language as something that has a theory of power. Okay. And power, most broadly speaking, is your ability to affect something in the world, right? You make your reality that you want to happen. Rich people are powerful because they have the ability to make the world the way they want it to. Most of us don't have power because we cannot make the world the way we want it to be. So political writing is almost always convincing somebody to think something or do something, right? That's essentially, that's the point of it. You're trying to convince somebody. And there's different mechanisms to accomplish this. And so you have to ask yourself, is this writing for power or against power? Which, you know, it's maybe the better way to say that is this a democratic way of writing, or is this a disciplinary way of writing? Okay, are you trying to tell somebody, shut up, just accept things the way they are, or are you saying something's wrong and, you know, and we have to do something else? Okay, how do people do this? All right, how does somebody work for or against power in their writing? First, they establish their authority to speak on the topic, all right? And typically, if like the way that somebody presents themselves is important in understanding their sense of power, right? If you're saying, I'm the expert, I'm the fucking smarty here, and you guys don't know what you're talking about, chances are you're going to be writing about why the status quo is good, right? If you're not doing that, or if you're saying anybody actually has the right to talk about this subject, that's a democratic way of discussing something, right? So this is about who's allowed to comment. So people also have other tricks about whether they're going to do this for or against power. One of them is, how do you select or omit information, right? You know, it's not like when you read like bourgeois journalism, it's not merely that they say, oh, business person A is great, right? It's about what they don't say, right? There's a careful pruning of things that are not to be considered. And so you have to think about who needs to be part of a conversation, right? That's an important part. Last couple things are the language used, right? Oftentimes when somebody's trying to tell you that ideas or policy is off bounds, they'll use language to say nobody is allowed to know about this by making it very academic, technical, right? Written in a sort of jargon that tells somebody right off the bat, this is not for you. You're not allowed here, right? So when you write and you're trying to be a democratic writer, you're inviting people. What you're doing is, even if you have expertise, you're trying to break down the concept of experts and share that out and say, actually, this thing that we're told is very complicated is actually pretty simple, and this is what it is. You have the right to comment on it, right? So lastly, are you trying to clarify things or obscure them, right? These are questions that come up when you're trying to see how is somebody writing. Okay, so if writing is politics, who is the writing for? When you're, as much as possible, right, you want to write so anybody can understand you. You don't want to write for just other people on the left, right? Sometimes that's fine when you're talking about something, say, in an organization, right? You're writing for the members of the organization, that's fine. If you're writing about a big subject, you want anybody to be able to read what you said and understand it, right? You don't have to dumb it down, right? But you want to include things so that way it's written in a way that people can follow what it is that you're saying, okay? Writing itself is a democratic function, right? Because part of the idea of democracy is that, you know, we make choices and we need information to do that. If somebody robs you of the information, right, they're trying to skew you so that way you only make a certain kind of decision. We need information about what's happening. We need to know the world. We need to be part of all of this, so that way we can participate and govern ourselves, right? This little quip about destroying High Latin, if people don't know what that is, you know, back in the Middle Ages, High Latin was the language that was spoke, you know, like only like priests and nobility could read and write. So that information was only for them. And you don't want to do that on the left or with any commentary, right? So are you assuming that only educated people can participate and that everything's really complicated? Or are you saying that actually everybody is capable of understanding? This is a fundamental assumption that socialist writing needs to have. people are capable of understanding issues in the world and they're also capable of making good, like informed decisions about it. If you don't believe that, then stop doing whatever. You're not doing socialist writing. Like that's just not your politics. So if you're an expert, you know something about it, take complicated things and break them down so people can understand them. Like bureaucracies, government orders, academics, they all try to make things as complicated as possible to hide, you know, like who's allowed to talk about like decisions that anybody could make, right? So break those things down and make them approachable. All right. Your style is also going to embody your politics and your approach. So it's going to be pretty clear in your writing, who do you respect and who don't you respect? So if you're constantly giving praise to small business owners and, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, well, I'm pretty sure that we know where you fall, right? But if you're going to be talking to people and saying, oh, you know, you go to every community meeting, you're the expert that I want to talk to. I don't care if you have a title or not. That shows who you respect. Okay. And like I keep saying, is your article work to read, right? You don't want to make something that is labor that only certain qualified people can do. All right. This bit here has been something I found really useful, which is writing as problem posing. So this is from Paulo Freire, who's a Brazilian educator. He is going to talk about doing the exact opposite of what I've been doing in this presentation. So I'll read this out real quick, which is, in problem posing education, people develop their power to perceive critically the way they exist in the world with which and in which they find themselves. They come to see the world not as a static reality, but as reality in process and in transformation. Although dialectical relations of women and men with the world exist independently of how these relations are perceived, it is also true that the form of action they adopt is to a large extent a function of how they perceive themselves in the world. Okay, that's a nice thing to point out. But basically, what you a way that you can think about writing is you're problem posing, right? There's a problem often when we're thinking about writing. What's the problem and why are we writing, right? The problem is we're not talking about this, or the problem is I see this thing and it's coming and we're not talking about it, or whatever, right? So when you're problem posing, you're bringing someone along with you in understanding that, right? You're saying, okay, here are the things that are going on. Here's the problem. Let's understand that and then move forward with it. So maybe that's not the greatest explanation of it, but when you think about your writing as posing a problem and then you try to investigate and understand it and move through it, this is actually bringing your reader along with you as somebody that can understand the world and get a better sense of it, right? Like to be able to participate. All right, I already went through this. All right, this is one thing that I harp on a lot. This is a construction thing, which is passive voice versus active voice. Okay, are people familiar with this more or less? Okay, I bring it up because a lot of people slide into passive voice. So active voice is actor performs an action. Actor plus verb they performed by the actor, and then the subject onto which it's performed. Andy cooked a pie. That's a bad sentence because it should be Andy baked a pie, but you know, active. Here's this person, they're doing the thing. Passive voice, right, is an action happened without reference to the actor. Subject plus past or future tense verb. A pie was cooked. Who did it? Just happened, right? Or a pie was cooked by Andy. That's a weird thing to say, but you know, it tries to take the subject or the actor and remove them from what they are doing, right? So this is used politically quite often when you're trying to not claim responsibility for something, right? This happens in like police reporting all the time. A suspect was shot. Who shot him? Right? Or whatever. This always happens. And so even just the political act of saying police shot this person, like it's just a way that you're constructing the sentence, but that has that shows there's somebody responsible for a thing, right? All right, passive voice politically. So it avoids saying who did something. It's used to obscure and remove the actor who's doing things. They become an absent referent, right? Somebody did something, but we don't know who, right? Often people use this in left writing, or especially when they're trying to justify something that's gross. It's also very difficult to follow, right? So you use passive voice. People do this often when they're trying to say something without owning that they're saying it, right? The ways in which one might decide upon who to canvass is a decision that many make for themselves. What the fuck does that mean, right? It doesn't make any sense. It's used to try to get away from what it is you're actually talking about, right? Political use, like I said, authority in the police, right? The murder of George Floyd, right? The murderer here becomes absent, the police. All right, it is also used in official and bureaucratic language. An error was made on your paycheck. Who did it? Just happened, right? A decision was made that comment would no longer be acceptable after a given period, right? That if you're in DSA, you probably hear this kind of stuff, right? A decision was made. Who made it, right? Why was it made? But it's just a way of saying this has happened and now you just live with it, okay? Is there ever a time when passive voice is okay? Yes, there are times when it is okay, right? It's when the actor isn't the important thing, it's the action or the recipient, right? The bridge was built after a historic flood. Who built it doesn't really matter here. It's that's the point is it was built at a certain time, right? Or you're talking about a generalized tendency. That's when it's okay generally to use passive voice. All right, this is my, I think, last thing. Pretty sure it is, which is I suggested that people read the George Orwell essay, the Politics in the English Language. He does a lot of things that are useful, some things that are not so useful. He's very attached to English in particular. I am not attached to English in particular. Whatever language you choose to use, like that's fine. But his rules for what makes for good and bad writing are generally pretty sound. Okay, so one, don't use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech that you're used to seeing in print, right? So if somebody's using this phrase over and over and over, it gets stale. It loses its power to be evocative or to really show anything anymore. Don't use it, right? Don't use a long word where a short one will do, right? You don't need to say exacerbate or something like that if it's not necessary. Just think about stuff where you want to write in a way that as many people as possible can understand. Big words are great, but like I said, it's a dash of salt, not the whole meal. All right, if it's possible to cut out a word, cut it out, right? So when you're editing, go through and see, is it necessary that all of these words are here? If you can get rid of a word, it'll make your writing sharper and punchier, right? And easier to read. So go through and see, is it necessary that those words are there? Don't use a passive where you can use active, and don't use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or jargon if you can think of an everyday equivalent, okay? So in this case, right, it would be like somebody say like, and it's a sui generis way of doing it. Like, I don't know what that means. Like maybe some people do, but just say what you mean, right? Like usually what you're telling the reader at that point is, oh, I'm a cultured person and let me prove it to you by using words like sui generis, right? And last thing is break any rule rather than say something really shitty, right? Like if your writing is going to say something just absolutely horrible, then don't do that.